7:55 a.m. A U.S. radar operator stares at a screen full of blips, 183 of them. He picks up the phone. Probably our B-17s from California. Hangs up. 7 minutes later, the first bomb explodes. This is the moment America's isolation died. Let's step back 24 hours to fully understand what led to this catastrophic morning. December 6, 1941 was a Saturday, and for the thousands of sailors, Marines, airmen, and civilians stationed across the island of Oahu, it felt like just another weekend in paradise. The tropical sun dipped low over the Ko'olau Mountains, casting long golden shadows across Pearl Harbor's calm, glassy waters. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and plumeria leis. Across Ford Island, the Block Recreation Center buzzed with excitement as more than 1,500 servicemen and their guests packed the auditorium for the annual Battle of the Bands, an event that had become a cherished tradition in the Pacific Fleet. 8 Navy bands competed for bragging rights and a set of gleaming silver cups. The USS Arizona's band, 21 musicians strong and led by the charismatic Lieutenant Commander James Waters, took the stage last. They launched into a swinging, upbeat rendition of Sweet Leilani, the Hawaiian love song that had just won an Academy Award for Best Original Song in the Bing Crosby film Waikiki Wedding. The crowd erupted in cheers, whistles, and thunderous applause. The judges declared the Arizona band the winner. Photos captured the moment. Young men in crisp white uniforms, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning ear to ear, holding their trophies high. None of them could have imagined that within less than 12 hours, 19 of those 21 musicians would be dead. Their silver cups melted into slag. Their promised victory tour to the mainland canceled forever. Out on Battleship Row, the heart of America's Pacific Fleet lay at anchor in perfect, orderly lines. 7 massive battleships, USS Arizona, Nevada, Oklahoma, West Virginia, California, Tennessee, and Maryland, were moored 2 by 2, bow to stern, their gray hulls rising like steel cliffs from the water. In total, 94 warships filled the harbor. Heavy cruisers, light cruisers, destroyers, submarine tenders, repair ships, and auxiliaries. Most crews were ashore on weekend liberty, dancing at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, drinking beer at the Black Cat Cafe, or strolling Waikiki Beach with their sweethearts. Those still aboard went about routine Saturday evening tasks, polishing brass fittings until they gleamed like mirrors, writing letters home on Navy stationery, or gathering in the mess decks for card games and tall tales. On the Arizona, Seaman Second Class James Lawson, a lanky 19-year-old from Amarillo, Texas, sat at a small desk in his compartment, pen in hand. "Dear Mom," he wrote, "Hawaii is everything they said it would be and more. The water is so clear you can see fish swimming 20 feet down. Tell Dad the pineapples here are sweeter than anything back home. I'll be shipping out for maneuvers soon, but I should be home for Christmas. Save me a slice of your pecan pie." He folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and tucked it into his sea bag to mail in the morning. He never got the chance. On the USS West Virginia, Mess Attendant 3rd Class Doris Miller, a towering 22-year-old from Waco, Texas, finished his evening shift in the officer's galley. At 6'3" and 260 pounds, Miller was a former high school footballer who had enlisted in the Navy in 1939 to escape sharecropping and send money home to his parents. He was one of the few black sailors allowed to serve on a battleship, though his role was limited to cooking, cleaning, and serving white officers. Miller was also the ship's heavyweight boxing champion, undefeated in the fleet smoker fights. That night, he helped a slightly inebriated lieutenant navigate the ladder wells back to his cabin after a few too many at the enlisted men's club. Miller's watch was 4 to 8 a.m. in the galley, so he turned in early, pulling his blanket over his head to block out the snores of his bunkmates. He had no idea that in a few short hours he would become one of the first American heroes of World War II. Meanwhile, 350 miles north-northwest of Oahu, the Japanese First Air Fleet steamed south at a steady 24 knots under a moonless sky. 6 aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, formed a loose box formation, surrounded by a protective screen of battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. Total radio silence. No lights, no smoke. The only sound was the rhythmic thud of propellers and the hiss of waves against steel hulls. On Akagi's bridge, Vice Admiral Chuichi Naguno stood wrapped in a heavy coat, collar turned up against the cold Pacific wind. Nagumo was a cautious man, a torpedo expert by training, not an aviator. He had argued against this mission in Tokyo, warning that striking Pearl Harbor was a gamble that could cost Japan its entire carrier force. But Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, had overruled him. Yamamoto's logic was simple. America's Pacific Fleet was the only obstacle to Japan's conquest of Southeast Asia's oil, rubber, and rice. Destroy it in one surprise blow, and Japan would have 6 months to a year to secure its empire before America could rebuild. Nagumo's orders were clear. Launch 2 waves of aircraft at dawn, cripple the battleships and airfields, then withdraw before American carriers could counterattack. Success hinged on one thing: complete surprise. Intelligence had assured Nagumo that the Americans were complacent. Japanese spies in Honolulu, operating under diplomatic cover at the consulate, reported no long-range patrol planes flying north of Oahu, no heightened alert status, and no unusual activity at the airfields. The Americans, they said, believed war was still months away. Negotiations in Washington between Secretary of State Cordell Hull and Japanese ambassadors Kichisaburo Nomura and Saburo Kurusu were tense but ongoing. The U.S. had demanded Japan withdraw from China and Indochina. Japan had demanded the U.S. lift its oil embargo. Neither side budged. But no one in Hawaii expected war to begin with a Sunday morning air raid. At 3:42 a.m. Hawaiian time, the Japanese carriers turned into the wind. Red lamps flooded the flight decks. Ground crews in padded suits waved glow wands. Engines coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. The first wave, 183 aircraft, began launching in perfect sequence. 43 sleek Mitsubishi A6M0 for air superiority and strafing. 51 Aichi D3A Val dive bombers, armed with 550-pound general-purpose bombs. 49 Nakajima B5N Kate level bombers, carrying 1,760-pound armor-piercing bombs converted from 16-inch naval shells. And 40 Kates configured as torpedo planes, each carrying a single Type 91 aerial torpedo modified with wooden fins to run in Pearl Harbor's shallow 40-foot waters. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, the strike leader, climbed into the observer seat of the lead Kate. He carried a green flare gun. 1 flare meant surprise achieved. 2 meant the enemy was alert and the attack must shift to a combat air patrol. As the planes formed up in the pre-dawn darkness, Fuchida looked down at the carriers disappearing into the Black Sea. He checked his watch, 6 a.m. Japanese time. In Hawaii, it was 3:30 a.m. The sky was still ink. Back on Oahu, the Army's Opana mobile radar station began its graveyard shift. Perched on a hilltop near Kahuka Point, the station was part of a chain of 6 secret SCR-270 radar units designed to give early warning of approaching aircraft. Private Joseph Lockard, a 21-year-old from Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and Private George Elliott, 19, from Chicago, settled into the cramped shack. The radar's antenna swept the horizon in slow arcs. The screen glowed green and empty. Lockard brewed coffee on a hot plate. Elliott pulled a dog-eared copy of Captain America from his ditty bag. Neither soldier had any idea they were the first line of defense for the entire Pacific Fleet. At 6:30 a.m., the Japanese second wave, 171 aircraft, began launching. Total strike force 354 planes, the largest aerial armada ever assembled to that point. Fuchida's orders were precise. Prioritize the battleships, then destroy the airfields at Wheeler, Hickam, and Ford Island, then, if time allowed, bomb the oil tank farm containing 4.5 million barrels of fuel, enough to supply the Pacific Fleet for 2 years of war. But under no circumstances were the repair shops, dry docks, or submarine base to be targeted. Japan wanted to cripple America's ability to fight in the Pacific, not destroy its ability to repair and rebuild. The plan assumed the U.S. would negotiate peace rather than commit to a long, bloody war across an ocean. At 7 a.m., the Opana radar picked up the first faint blip. Lockard adjusted the gain. 1 blip became 5, then 20, then a solid wall of returns. Distance 137 miles. Bearing 003 degrees, due north. Speed 180 miles per hour. Lockard's hands trembled. He had never seen anything like it in training. He grabbed the field telephone and cranked the handle. The call went to the information center at Fort Shafter, where the switchboard operator patched him through to Lieutenant Kermit Tyler, a pursuit pilot from the 78th Fighter Squadron on temporary radar duty. Tyler was exhausted. He had flown a dawn patrol earlier and was filling in for the regular radar officer. He knew a flight of B-17s was due in from California sometime that morning, no exact time. He assumed the blips were them. He told Lockard, "Well, don't worry about it." Lockard protested, "Sir, this is the biggest thing I've ever seen on this set." Tyler repeated, "Don't worry about it." The call ended at 7:06 a.m. No alert was sounded. No call went to Wheeler Field, where 180 P-40 Warhawks and P-36 Hawks sat wing to wing, fully fueled but unarmed. No call went to Haliwau Auxiliary Field, where a handful of fighters were kept on 5-minute alert. The greatest air raid in history was 30 minutes away, and America slept. At 7:40 a.m., Fuchida's first wave crossed the northern tip of Oahu. He fired 1 green flare. Surprise achieved. The planes banked south toward Pearl Harbor. Below, the island stirred to life. Church bells rang for early mass at St. Anthony's in Kailua. Housewives in Schofield Barracks started coffee percolators. Children in civilian neighborhoods rode bicycles to the beach. No one looked up. 7:49. The first wave split into 3 groups. Torpedo planes dropped to 50 feet and skimmed the wave tops toward Battleship Row. Dive bombers climbed to 12,000 feet over Hickam Field. Level bombers formed a perfect V over Ford Island. Zero streaked ahead to strafe the airfields. At Wheeler Field, mechanics were rolling P-40s out of hangars for morning inspection. Zeros roared in at 300 miles per hour, 20mm cannons and 7.7mm machine guns blazing. Planes exploded in their revetments. Hangars erupted in flames. Men ran in their underwear, grabbing rifles, firing uselessly at the sky. At Haliwawa, Lieutenants George Welch and Kenneth Taylor, still hungover from a late-night poker game, heard the explosions. They jumped into their civilian cars, raced to the field, and somehow got 2 P-40s airborne through the smoke. They would shoot down 6 Japanese planes between them, the only American fighters to get off the ground. 7:53. The first torpedo struck USS Oklahoma. A modified Type 91 aerial torpedo punched through the hull below the waterline, detonating with a muffled thud that shook the entire ship. A second followed 30 seconds later. A third. Oklahoma listed rapidly to port. Men slid down the deck into the water. Some were machine-gunned as they swam. Captain Howard Bode ordered counter-flooding to stabilize the ship, but it was too late. Oklahoma rolled over in 12 minutes, her masts digging into the harbor bottom. 429 men were trapped below decks in air pockets. Rescue crews would cut through the hull for 36 hours, saving only 32. 7:55. The radar operator's 7-minute window opened. Fuchida's plane flew over Barber's Point. He saw Battleship Row perfectly aligned, no anti-aircraft fire, no fighters in the sky. He radioed Akagi. "Tora! Tora!" The attack was on. 7:55:30. Torpedo planes released over the west side of Ford Island. 8 torpedoes streaked toward USS West Virginia. 6 hit in under a minute. A third. West Virginia settled fast by the stern. Captain Mervyn Benyon was on the bridge when shrapnel from a nearby bomb explosion tore into his abdomen. He refused to leave his post, directing damage control even as blood soaked his uniform. He died minutes later, awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. Mess attendant Doris Miller carried his dying captain to cover, then ran to an abandoned .50 caliber anti-aircraft gun on the signal deck. He had never been trained to fire it. He braced the gun, pulled the trigger, and kept firing until the ammo boxes were empty. Japanese planes fell from the sky. Sailors cheered. Miller would be credited with 4 confirmed kills. 7:56. Dive bombers screamed down on Hickam Field in 70-degree dives, releasing 550-pound bombs at 1,500 feet. Hangars erupted. B-17s arriving from California flew straight into the attack. One fortress, piloted by Captain Raymond Swenson, landed on Hickam with its guns still in grease. The crew leaped out, staring in disbelief at the burning harbor. They had flown 2,400 miles into hell. 7:57. USS Arizona was still untouched. Sailors lined the rails, watching Oklahoma capsize in horror. Many thought it was a drill gone terribly wrong. Then the high-level bombers appeared at 10,000 feet. At 7:57:40, a 1,760-pound armor-piercing bomb dropped from a Kate flown by Lieutenant Commander Kakuchi Takahashi. It fell for 27 seconds, struck just forward of Turret 2, penetrated 4 decks, and detonated in the forward magazine. 1,800,000 pounds of gunpowder ignited in a chain reaction. The explosion lifted the 32,000-ton ship 10 feet out of the water. The forward half disintegrated. A fireball 1,000 feet high consumed everything. 1,177 men died in under 10 seconds, the fastest loss of life in U.S. naval history. 7:59. USS California took a torpedo amidships, then a 550-pound bomb on her forecastle. She settled by the stern, her decks awash. USS Nevada, moored ahead of Arizona, attempted to get underway. Captain Francis Scanlon hoped to steam down the channel and beach her outside the harbor to avoid blocking the entrance. A Val dive bomber put a 250-pound bomb through her forecastle, starting fires. Nevada grounded herself on Hospital Point to avoid sinking in the channel. 8:00. Battleship Row was a furnace. Thick black oil slicks burned on the water. Men swam through flames, their skin blistering. Some were rescued by small boats. Many were not. The hospital ship, Solace, painted white with red crosses, took aboard hundreds of wounded. Nurses worked in blood up to their ankles, performing amputations on mess tables. 8:02. The first wave peeled off. Fuchida circled overhead, assessing damage. 8 battleships hit, 3 destroyers, 3 cruisers. Hickam, Wheeler, and Bellows fields in flames. He radioed Nagumo, begging for a third wave to destroy the oil tanks, 4.5 million barrels that could fuel the Pacific Fleet for 2 years of war. Nagumo refused. He feared the American carriers, whose location was unknown. He ordered withdrawal. The second wave, 171 planes, arrived at 8:54 a.m. They focused on the airfields and remaining ships. By 9:45 a.m., they too were gone. Total Japanese losses, 29 planes, 55 airmen, 5 midget submarines, and 1 captured sailor. American losses, 2,430 dead, 1,178 wounded, 18 ships sunk or damaged, 188 planes destroyed. At 10 a.m., the smoke still rose in thick columns visible from Waikiki. Sailors in small boats searched the water for survivors. They found bodies, dog tags, life jackets, and fragments of steel. On the Arizona, fireman third-class Warren Upton was blown clear by the explosion. He swam to Ford Island, collapsed on the beach, and lived to tell the story. On the West Virginia, Doris Miller helped load the wounded onto motor launches. He would receive the Navy Cross, the first black sailor ever to earn it. But not yet. The Navy would wait 6 months until political pressure and a campaign by the black press forced their hand. At noon, Admiral Husband E. Kimmel, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, stood on Hospital Point in a white uniform streaked with oil and soot. He stared at the burning harbor, his fleet in ruins. He said quietly to an aide, "It looks like they got us." He would be relieved of command within days. So would Lieutenant General Walter C. Short, commander of the Army in Hawaii. Both would be blamed for lack of readiness. Both would spend the rest of their lives defending their names in congressional hearings and writing memoirs no one wanted to read. By nightfall, the count was in. 2,403 Americans dead. 1,177 on the Arizona alone. 68 civilians killed by friendly anti-aircraft fire when shells fell back to earth in Honolulu neighborhoods. 1,143 wounded packed into Tripler Army Hospital and the Navy's mobile hospital units. The fleet was crippled, but the carriers were safe. Enterprise was 200 miles west, returning from delivering F-4F Wildcats to Wake Island. Lexington was 500 miles southeast, ferrying planes to Midway. Saratoga was in San Diego, preparing to rejoin the fleet. The submarine base was untouched. The repair shops were intact. The oil tanks, 4.5 million barrels, stood unharmed. Japan had won a stunning tactical victory, but strategically, they had awakened a giant. December 8, 1941. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt addressed a joint session of Congress. His voice was calm, resolute, broadcast to 33 million Americans on radio. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. He asked for a declaration of war. The Senate voted 82-0. The House, 388-1. Jeannette Rankin, the first woman elected to Congress, cast the lone no vote, repeating her pacifist stance from World War I. America was at war. In the weeks that followed, the nation mobilized with a speed and fury no one had anticipated. Shipyards in Newport News, Bremerton, and Mara Island worked 24 hours a day. Women flooded factories, taking jobs as riveters, welders, and electricians. Young men lined up at recruiting stations from Bangor to San Diego. 16 million Americans would serve in uniform, 405,000 would not come home. Pearl Harbor was the spark. The fire would burn across the Pacific, North Africa, and Europe for 4 more years. Today, the USS Arizona lies exactly where she sank, her hull a tomb for 900 men. The Navy declared her a war grave. No recovery, no disturbance. Oil still seeps from her ruptured tanks, 2 to 9 quarts a day, rising to the surface in shimmering black bubbles. Veterans call them black tears. They have wept for 84 years. They will weep for another century. Every bubble is a name. Every bubble is a story. Every bubble is a reminder. Freedom is not free. 7 minutes. 183 planes. 1 ignored radar blip. 1 cook with a machine gun. 1 battleship still crying. This is how America entered the greatest war in history. And this is how the world changed in less time than it takes to brush your teeth. Dedicated to the 2,400 who never came home, and to the millions who answered the call. Next time, the cook who shot down 4 planes with 0 training and became America's first black war hero. Hit subscribe. The 90-Day Journey.